So what the three of us are going to be speaking about for this next portion of the presentation is focused on what abilities are preserved in dementia. We know that there's much that's lost, but there are also many abilities that are preserved. And then Chris is going to talk about the art of communication. How do we have clear and good interactions with people that are struggling with cognitive problems? And the heart of our presentation will be Tim talking about how do we help people with cognitive problems and their family members stay engaged in the faith community and involved in their faith practices. And then we'll end up kind of wrapping up with how to identify and help those family caregivers, those people in the congregation that are related to or care about folks with cognitive problems. So first we wanted to start off with just explaining what does it mean when someone has a diagnosis of dementia. Now this is based on DSM-4 criteria, and there will be new criteria that's coming out in October where we actually won't even use the word dementia anymore. We will use the word mild or major neurocognitive disorder. So just when you think you can start to understand what something means, they'll put a name on it that no one understands. So major or mild neurocognitive disorder, you can look for that in the fall. Currently, the way we look at a diagnosis of dementia is that someone has to have multiple cognitive deficits. So that means it's not just memory problems, but it might be memory problems plus judgment problems, which is what Joy and Kathy were talking about this morning. So when we talk about someone having memory deficits, it could be that they have difficulty learning or storing information. It could be that the information gets stored, but they forget it once it gets in there, or that they have difficulty retrieving the information that's stored. So I don't know how many of you have been to the doctor and the doctor does a brief memory screen for you and starts out with, I'm going to give you 3 words. I want you to remember these words because I'm going to ask them to you later. So let's pretend I'm doing that. So if I say I'm going to give you 3 words, shirt, brown, and honesty, and if you then, we do a distractor task and come back in a few minutes, and you say, I remember you told me those 3 words, and I remember that one of the words is shirt, but I don't remember the other 2. It might be that you're having difficulty learning that information. But if I say to you, gosh, the second word was a color, and you say, oh, brown, of course it was brown, then part of the issue is that there's information that's stored there in your brain, but you're having a hard time pulling it out from, or forgetting that information that's stored there in some way. Where if it's a retrieval deficit that you're having with your memory, if you don't remember the last word, you knew there were 3 words, we know you've got shirt and brown now, and I say, well, the last word was a good personal quality. You're still not recalling it. I may say, was it honesty, charity? And if you're able to say, oh, honesty, you recognize the word, that means your memory problem is that the information is stored there, you're forgetting it, and it's a retrieval problem. So part of what somebody can have when they've got a diagnosis of dementia is that they have one of those 3 types of memory problems. Now, the reason it's important to know that is if you know what type of memory problem someone has, it allows you to be able to set up the environment in a way for them to be more successful. So in addition, if someone has a diagnosis of dementia today, in addition to having a memory problem, they have to have at least one additional cognitive problem. So it could be a problem that's called aphasia, which means that they have language difficulty or naming problem or comprehension problem. And it can be that they have a hard time coming up with words or saying, this is a microphone, or this on my wrist is a watch. That's one type of language problem, a naming problem. It could also be a problem where they have a hard time understanding. You're saying a certain thing and they're not really comprehending exactly what you're saying. That can also be classified as aphasia. Apraxia is another type of cognitive problem that has to do with difficulties with purposeful movement. And where you see that sometimes in practice is when someone has, for example, a hard time getting dressed. It may be that it's difficult to button buttons, and it's not because physically they're not able to do it. It's because cognitively their brain isn't allowing them to do that correctly. Agnosia is another cognitive deficit which is a failure to recognize objects. So where somebody may not recognize the spoon that's sitting next to their plate and know that they could use that to help them with eating soup, for example. Executive functioning is another cognitive deficit, and it's involved, it's located actually in the front part of the brain, and it's involved with all kinds of complicated activities, such as planning something, organizing something, initiating activity, even the example that Joy gave of brushing teeth. I mean, who knew it took 100 steps or over 100 steps to brush teeth? So you can imagine when you're talking about a task that's much more complicated, like driving, for example, how many thousands of steps are involved with driving tasks. So executive functioning has to do with the ability to do those planning and organizing type tasks, as well as sequencing, putting things in order, reasoning, abstract reasoning, using judgment. So when somebody has a diagnosis of dementia, they've got a memory problem and then one of these other cognitive problems. And the difficulty that they're having has to somehow impact them, either impact their work functioning, their occupational functioning, or their social functioning. So that's part of the reason you'll sometimes see today people that will have a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment or vascular cognitive impairment, because they're having these deficits, but it's not gotten to the point that it's impacted them socially or impacted their occupational functioning. You also want it to be a decline from their past functioning, meaning that somebody functioned at a certain level earlier in their life, and at this point, this is a decline from what they've had previously. And then you want to make sure this isn't delirium. This isn't some acute confusion that's happening because the person has a urinary tract infection or something else like that that could be treated. And it actually could be related to somebody's general medical condition. It could be related to their drugs or toxin. And probably one of the most important things is the diagnosis doesn't include prognosis. So just because somebody's got a diagnosis of dementia, that doesn't tell us what the future is going to be for that person. And that's why we really, as a group, try to encourage people, get as much information as possible. If you know somebody's got a diagnosis of dementia, you want to know why they have dementia. The same way if the doctor said to you, gosh, I think you've got a little bit of cancer, you wouldn't just say, oh, well, thank you for letting me know that. You'd want to know, well, gosh, where is it? What kind of cancer is it? What organ is it affected? What treatments, what stage is it? Where am I along the process? Not only would you want to know that, but your family would also want to know, what does this mean for our lives? And I would encourage you very much to be an advocate for yourself and for your families and for your congregation to really push. By and large, healthcare professionals are kind of uncomfortable with this topic, and that some of them feel a little bit hopeless. They wish they could do more. There's no cure for it, so you really do have to push for it. When we think about the issues related to memory, we understand that there are two different types of memory, explicit memory and implicit memory. And explicit memory, does this have a little pointer on it, do you know? Oh, here we go. So this, in Alzheimer's disease, is part of what's decimated for people, declarative memory. So memory of what I ate for breakfast this morning, any fact that exists in my life or events. But this, there's studies that demonstrate people with Alzheimer's disease continue to learn, continue to have memory gains, the same as people that don't have dementia in this particular type. So skills and habits that people have, they can continue to learn how to do those things. Classical conditioning and non-associative learning. So these are the types of memory abilities that are expressed through performance, through doing things. So I remember a woman that I was working with in a long-term care setting had been a very accomplished pianist. And she was sitting in the living room in the long-term care facility, and there was a big piano in the room, and her back was to the piano. And I said something about, so I understand that you played piano. And she said, oh, I love to play piano. I sure wish I could play piano. And I said, well, would you like to play the piano? well, I don't see a piano anywhere in the room. So she didn't remember, so that's this. She didn't remember that fact that there was a piano in the room. But when I said, gosh, I think right here is a piano, turn around, and she was like, she went and sat down and played, you know, beautiful. And far into the disease, these skills that people have, these performances that people have that are overlearned, will hang in there a long time. So that's part of the reason in the faith community that you'll find if people have had faith practices of doing devotional or morning prayers or evening prayers or saying the Lord's Prayer, those things that we have done a million times provide lots of comfort for us, and we're still able to do those things far into the course of the disease. So other preserved abilities that people have is awareness of emotion. So regardless of the stage that someone's at, people are very aware of and attuned to facial expressions, to tone of voice, how they're touched, how people interact with them, and very much appreciate humor, smiles, interacting. It's really the mechanisms of the social interaction that hang in there a very long time, much more than the content of the interaction. The sociability and social skills that will happen, this is one of the things that is also very overlearned. Think how many times in your life you have run into people in your faith community and had a 3-minute conversation. How are you today? I'm doing fine. Wow, it's so great that the weather's finally warming up, isn't it? Just back and forth, but the content of it isn't all that important. Sometimes we'll see people that will complain and say, yeah, you know, I took my husband, we went to church, and he's the one that's got cognitive problems. I took my husband to church, and he was interacting with one of my good friends at church, and afterwards she came up to me and said, well, I don't know why you think he's having such a problem. He seems like he's just fine to me, you know, and things like that, that, you know, as you could see from the clips that Joy was showing, the folks that were in those clips all had different diagnoses of Alzheimer's disease. So even when somebody can go through the mechanisms of a social interaction, that doesn't mean that they don't have cognitive problems. Other things that hang in there a long time are sensory awareness, and like I mentioned before, habits and skills that people have, activities like golfing and dancing and playing piano, and then the primary motor function, anything that's done with our bodies. So, okay, I think at this point Chris is going to step up and talk about communication.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Geez, that was good. One of the things when I first started working at Clark, I was the coordinator of dementia services, and the alert and independent residents decided that they didn't want to talk to me because I had dementia in my name tag, and I might give them dementia. So I'm only saying that the people you know that have dementia aren't going to give it to you. So one of the most important things that you can do, in my view, is to learn how to communicate with them. When I do staff orientation, I'm asking questions now of them. What would happen if today you were diagnosed with Alzheimer's or Lewy body dementia? How would you feel? And then I go on to say, what would be your greatest fear? And a lot of the staff will say, my greatest fear is that people won't talk to me and I'll be alone. So as I enter into this discussion about communication, please remember it might be you someday, it might be me, but whoever it is that has the dementia, they are going to still want to be a part of, they want people to communicate with them, just like you would. So one of the things that I think is so important about communication is that we stress the person has to feel good about themselves, to have self-esteem, to still be a person. So communication is something you can do for someone that has dementia that will make a difference for them. No one wants to go to church and have no one speak to them. I know that I worked with a woman, and she said, the place I felt the most comfortable was in my church community. But she says, my church community now isn't speaking to me, and I have become a non-person. And we really don't want that to happen. So communication, obviously, for all of us is a way that we reach out to each other. It's about listening to them so they still have a voice. People still have opinions, even if they have dementia. So we need to let them have that. I didn't bring the little poker. Okay. Communication. When someone has dementia and the disease affects the temporal lobe, that is where speech and language is stored. And when that becomes damaged, then they have a big loss. I considered it a big loss when I had laryngitis for 10 days and couldn't talk. I'm quite a talker, so that was very difficult for me. But I can't imagine not having the ability to communicate with other people. That would be devastating. So what do we do when we're with someone that has difficulty speaking? One of the first, and I've got to get my clicker going here, don't I? I am bad here. Identify yourself. If I were to visit my mother, say, in a nursing home or wherever she may be, and I would say, hi, Mom, it's Chris. I'm Chris, your daughter. So if you're in your faith-based community and you go up to someone that has memory loss, if you don't have a name tag on that they can read, then introduce yourself. Say their name. Say your name. And say their name, too. Make good eye contact. And remember, one of the most important things, I believe it was Kathy speaking about spatial perception problems and that sort of thing. You always need to come up to a person with dementia from the front because they're going to have a startled reflex if you come up from behind. So always make eye contact. One of the biggest things that I have, not switch this again, give the person time to respond. I have a lot of people that I work with that are very busy in their jobs, and they don't take time for the person to respond if they ask them a question. They say that it can take up to 90 seconds for a person to respond. But we would be intolerant of someone, a friend, if we had to wait 90 seconds for them to respond to us. But with someone that has brain damage, that ability to get that thought process and bring back some memories, it takes some time. So it is important to give them time. I remember one of the gentlemen that I used to work with, and he loved to go into our swim program. And he had it would take him about 90 seconds to respond. But when he did, he always had a great sense of humor. He would ask me about, did you get your boat in up at the lake yet? So he really knew what was going on, but it took time to respond. And because I took time for him, I became one of his very favorite people because I gave him that opportunity, and he trusted me. Avoid arguing. This is my favorite one to talk to families about because they can get in some pretty heated arguments with their loved one that has dementia, which is easy to do if you spend 24 hours with someone that asks the same question over and over and over again. I love to ask, did you ever win the argument with your person? And they always go, no, maybe they never did. But with the dementia, you know, you aren't going to win because it just doesn't work that way. So encourage unspoken communication. Oftentimes we think that they aren't thinking things or that they aren't able to talk about something. If we watch them and if they seem sad or angry, that we can sometimes see it in their face. I'm sure if someone comes to church and there's 300 people, they're going to look a little lost. So what a good way to communicate. I have a friend that I worked with for 4 or 5 years that had dementia, and he said, never leave me alone in a crowd. He said, I always need to have someone by me, by my side, maybe holding or just touching my arm. So look for those unspoken signs, because if we go back to what I said at the beginning, it might be you someday. And do you want to be lost in the crowd? Do you want to have people not speak to you? It's real important that everyone is treated equally. Another thing that happens are distractions. I have an adult foster care home, and I know whenever we used to use with one of our ladies around, when we used the dishwasher, she'd say, turn off that thing, turn it off, it's making, I can't get it when that's on, turn it off, turn it off. So right now there's a hum. You hear the hum? But you've all distracted it. Sounds, noises, visual things can be difficult. So think about those things when you're communicating. The other biggest thing that I have found that has really helped me communicate with people with memory loss is to focus on their feelings. Focus on their feelings. The facts aren't as important, but their feelings are, what they're experiencing is. Boy, I'm getting good at this now. I'm remembering to do it. Okay. Communication. Use a calm, gentle approach with reassuring touch. I have a video that I did of one of our residents, and she didn't like to be touched a whole lot. So some people like to be touched and some people don't. What I have found when they progress with the disease, they like to be touched a little bit more. Because if you think of the brain damage occurring, and their world is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, to be connected with other people is very important. To shake a hand of someone that's going through this. I was thinking as we were sitting up here about a lady that I've known for about 4 years, and now she has difficulty getting words out. But if I go up to her and say, hi, Sue, you're the RN. And she goes like that, and she goes, love you, love you, love you, love you, love you, love you, because I talked about that she was an RN, and she thinks that's really good. I can't say the other words she says when she's not happy with what you're talking about, but when she says, love you, love you, love you, you know you've done it well. But ask one question at a time. Don't be shooting a lot of questions at them. That's important. Be aware of your tone of voice. There's several things with tone of voice and how your voice sounds. If your voice is like this, just older people don't hear the higher pitch, so you need to lower it. I tell staff that if you're, and family members, if you've gotten into a little argument, and if you switch your voice to something calmer like this, they will respond pretty quickly to a calming voice. So that's important to do. Be patient. Back again, if it were you, how would you want to be treated? Would you want people to be patient with you? Would you want people to forgive you for something maybe you did wrong? Of course. Here I am again. Do not talk about the person as if they aren't there. Anyone ever had that done? Have you ever had someone talk about you and you walk in and you go, I wonder who they're talking about, you know? It must be me. We never know. And I've seen people through all the stages of dementia, and oftentimes in that last stage, they may be able to make a very firm connection. I remember one time I had a staff person call me from my adult foster care home, and she was crying. I said, what's wrong? Is a place on fire or someone get hurt? And she says, Evelyn talked to me. And I said, she talked to you? That's great. Evelyn hadn't spoken in 2 years, and she was in the end stage of the dementia. And this girl was scared because she was talking. And I said, it's okay, because she made a connection. Their brain worked for a little bit, and she was able to say some words. What a wonderful thing for that to happen. And you never know when that's going to occur. And one of my favorite things that happened with someone was I learned a long time ago about this therapy called validation, and I'm not going to quite get to that yet, but in validation therapy, they taught us to repeat what the person was saying. So one of the ladies said to me, blah, 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 blah. So I repeated that. Blah, 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 blah. And she looked at me and she said, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard anyone say. So, you know, you sort of have to be careful. But, but using reality orientation, if someone says, I want to go to church, and you say it was yesterday, is that going to make them feel good? No. We look forward to going to church. Just talk something like that. Or my mother, I'm looking for my mother. Where is she? And you say she died. We had the funeral here about 4 years ago. She's buried in the cemetery up there. How do you think she's going to feel? What might she feel? That grief all over again. And that grief might not lose her. Or that grief may be so overwhelming for her. And one thing you can notice with people with dementia, if something, and I'll give you an example, we had a movie a couple weeks ago at Clark that a couple of the ladies from one of the our dementia units wanted to go to. And she went to it, and it made her incredibly sad. She couldn't remember the name of the movie 2 days later, but she could remember that made her sad. So sometimes just bringing up that someone has died, you know, your mother's been dead 30 years, and that grief can overwhelm them again. And it was like this movie overwhelmed this resident because she heard that. So reality can be really hard for some people. But most important is to validate their feelings. Are they angry? Are they happy? Are they lost? To talk about those things and to connect with them in that manner. That's the best way to do it. And reality is, treat people like you would want to be treated. How would you want to be communicated with? This, in my mind, again, is the most important thing that you can give to people with dementia, is to communicate with them. If you learn anything today, and that's not saying much for all my old co-presenters, learn how to communicate and practice it and be with people that have dementia. Because there's going to be more of us. We're going to be everywhere. The numbers are growing. So let's get it right now, okay? Am I done?
In religious life, we are pretty programmed at times in things that need to happen in certain sequences, and sometimes there isn't a lot of patience to just let things go, or we want to move things along. And so what I'd like to talk about is the importance of creating a community that is not only friendly, but inviting and honoring a person where they are at, wherever they are in their dementia. So just think with me for a minute on what role, and this is an all play, so I'd like for you to help me with this. What role does your faith have in your life? What role does your faith have in your life? Just a couple people. Your faith doesn't have a role in your life? Yeah, thank you. It gives you peace. So it gives you peace in all aspects of your life, and it helps you to handle things that come your way. Okay. What role does faith play in your life? Yes, thank you, Margaret. Guides your thoughts? Thank you. Yes? Faith gives you purpose and direction. Yes? Faith is your grounding. Faith is your strength. There was one more. I heard a... Gives hope. Faith gives hope. Now, what about the role or function of your faith community? What role or function does your faith community play in your life? Yeah. Support. It gives you support. Your faith community gives you the support you need. Where you, jobs come and go, school comes and goes, but your faith community is part of your life from when you're born until you die. Yes? The glue that holds you together. The faith community is the glue that holds you together. So these are very powerful, very deeply rooted beliefs and also belongings. And those beliefs and belongings should not be taken away regardless of memory loss or dementia. And so I think that, faith gives us meaning. And meaning is, a meaningful life is a life worth living. And when we try to take that meaning away from somebody or diminish them because of a diagnosis, then we're robbing that individual, and we're also robbing the community of the life that is possible. So what I'd like to share with you is that nothing new is that memory loss is part of the faith community. People with memory loss are a part of your community, and they're part of your life. And we know the numbers, and we know that the church and the faith community is not immune from dementia. And so instead of trying to segregate ourselves away from it, why don't we invite it in and let it become a part of how we live together, and then how it does shape our belief and deepen our meaning. When I was first appointed as a pastor of a local church, I would, in my own way of doing things, would get to church usually around 7 o'clock in the morning, and if I was struggling with my sermon in the morning, then I'd get there even earlier, and I'd go in, and it was quiet, and I could pull myself together and get things going. And I mean, I did everything from turning on the lights. I did not have to put the wood in the stove, but I did do a lot to kind of get everything ready for Sunday morning. And so about 8 o'clock, I'd go around and I'd start unlocking the doors and making sure that the people who were going to do the morning coffee could get in. And as I was doing that, probably around September, October that first year, a parishioner started coming to church, and she wouldn't rap on the door, but by the time I got to opening that door, she was there. And I said, well, good morning. And she said, well, good morning. And I said, well, it's not quite time for church yet. And she said, well, I just got up and decided to come. And so that kind of went on for a few weeks, and I was kind of worried about her, so I went to her home, and I called first, and I said, I'd like to come and see you, and she said fine, and I went to her home, and she wasn't there, and then she called me back, and she said, oh, I went to the store, and I missed seeing you, and we tried to connect, and this pattern kept going on for several weeks, and finally about December, her daughter called the church and said, we've taken the keys away from Mom. She's not coming to church anymore, and I'm going to move her closer to me because she has some problems, and things just aren't tracking. And I felt this extreme sense of loss because in those morning visits that we'd have every Sunday, she shared with me that she was married in the parsonage next to the church. And I kind of tried to imagine what that parsonage looked like because it was now a parking lot. The parsonage was taken down, and we paved the way, and so we could have more room for cars. And she talked about the old church, and she had these rich stories about being part of this community, like you said, from the time that she was very young. She was married there, raised her children there, and her husband passed away, and she continued to live right in the community until her memory started to take her in different directions, and she left. And that was kind of the first entree that I had into realizing, what a loss for not only the person, but for our community. And that, because of this disease, then you're pulled away from all that you know. And then in a way, we didn't have a mechanism for dealing with or inviting her in or finding a place for her to belong. And then, as I kind of have told this story several times, I thought, I could have retooled myself and found ways at 8 o'clock in the morning when I opened that door to help her feel a sense of purpose and meaning in those moments of just not wandering around the church waiting for other people to come, but to give her purpose and meaning in that time that we were together. And so I think that creating opportunities is very important for the faith community. I was talking, and one person raised the question, well, our treasurer has memory loss, and we haven't found a way to deal with her yet. And I thought, well, maybe the treasurer job is not the best place for an individual with memory loss, but there are plenty of other places to find that meaning and purpose and direction. And it's not just saying, well, you no longer can be the treasurer because you don't have the ability to do the job anymore. The faith community is based on volunteers and finding ways to get people involved and connected. And an individual or a family that's dealing with memory loss, the church becomes, or the faith community becomes a vitally important spot for connection and also giving the caregiver a break and to also find ways that that caregiver can find a rich resource of being part of a community once again that's not involved in the day-to-day taking care of somebody and making sure that they're okay. So that's something that we have to rethink, because sometimes we're so quick to say, well, you can't do this anymore, and so we need to reassign you, or when nominations come around, we're going to make sure that you just kind of fall off the list and not get invited or involved again. And so it does involve educating and creating opportunities that are meaningful and purposeful, and not just saying, well, you can't do what you've always done for the last 35 or 45 or 55 years, so it's time that you retire or give this up. You're having to give up so much. The church, the faith community can be such a vital resource for purpose and belonging. And what I found is that what we already do and we already know how to do are staples, and those things are those rituals that we know and do very well. And what I found in my work is that the rituals of prayer, scripture, song, and message are vitally important for people with memory loss. And what it's required is shaping those rituals so that they are meaningful. And so repetitive things that may seem repetitive for those leading worship are very life-giving for an individual with memory loss. Like a repetitive prayer that I do is the Lord's Prayer or the Prayer of St. Francis. And we might say those two prayers at every worship service. And that's okay, because when I stop saying the prayer and I get to listen, as the voices around me that have been very silent and not said a word all of a sudden start repeating and saying that prayer and leading that prayer, it always moves me no matter what I'm doing. I step back and I shiver, because I'm not leading this. This is somebody who is saying this prayer because it's locked in, and it's accessing something that isn't able to be accessed at all times and places. But in the context of what we're doing, it's open and it's there, and that's very life-giving. Scripture reading. Scripture is a vitally important part of any faith tradition, and it's not the quantity, it's the quality. So when I started, I knew what I was doing. I had my toolbox, and I would get ready for my worship services in our certain areas that have memory loss, and I'd come and I'd pass out the blue hymnals, and I'd come with my bulletins, and I'd pick out all the old hymns, because that's what people with memory loss are going to want to sing, right? And it was the worst experience ever. And I remember going to Chris's office, and Chris and I were right across from each other, after about my first 6 or 8 weeks, and I said, this isn't working for me. And Chris looked at me and said, what's not working? And I said, this, what I do. And she says, well, what are you doing? And so I listed out everything I was doing, and she said, well, tell me, why isn't it working? And I thought about it. Well, when I say turn to hymn number 378 and let's sing Amazing Grace, when, you know, opening up a hymnal is a very foreign concept. So then I started, well, I'll print off the hymn sheets. That'll be a lot easier. You know, and then I thought about it after that didn't work. I thought, it's really hard to read music, to follow stanza 1, stanza 2, stanza 3, stanza 4. And so I threw all my papers away, and I just started singing. And then I did the same thing with Scripture. Instead of like reading 12 verses of some passage, I stuck with 1 or 2. And then I started a dialogue. And boy, I'm much more comfortable with my papers in front of me. But when you open up the opportunity to say, what does this scripture say to you? You're opening yourself up for a host of interpretation that you never imagined. And you learn stories, and you find out who the person really is because you're giving the opportunity, instead of just going through the motions, you're giving them the opportunity to find their voice within the story. And that became very important. So in our worship services that we do in areas of dementia, we invite prayer, scripture, song, and message, but it's in a totally recalibrated way that is very scary, in that you never know what you're going to get yourself into, but also very life-giving, because you find out these very rich stories, and you find deep meaning, and you find deep pain. When someone says, I hate the fact that I can't remember, you have to sit with that for a minute. You can't just move on to the next thing because we've got another hymn to sing. You have to see what the group thinks about that, and see how they engage with that. And that's very, very freeing to engage in that kind of worship. But you're creating an opportunity, and an opportunity for the faith community to really be a vital resource for individuals. So not what was, but what is. And that's the what is what we can create together as a faith community. We can create new opportunities for individuals, finding ways for them to feel a part and belong, as they always have, find new ways to do things that we always do, such as a worship service, or maybe even creating a Bible study, or some kind of setting that's a little different. And that's what this opportunity to work at Clark has given me. And I'd like for us to watch a few video clips of true voices of what faith means and what faith is. Now, these are people that are giving of themselves to you. And so you might recognize somebody in this video or these video clips. And so I just ask that you never reference them, or never say, oh, I saw your brother or your sister in a video presentation that I was at, because you're entering into the sacred story of their life and our sacred experience. So I just invite you to glean from this what you can, but also just to listen in and to see what people with memory loss are experiencing through worship. For us today.
That's fine.
Good. I'm glad you're willing.
I'm willing.
Good. I would just like for you to tell me a little bit about your faith and how important it is to your life right now.
My faith means everything to me, Tim. I wouldn't live without my faith.
That's beautiful.
It's just part of my life. And I've always felt this way. And I just, more and more as I'm older, it seems to increase. Well, that's about it.
Have you relied on your faith in good and bad times in your life?
Yes, I sure have. I almost always rely on it, I think.
That's great. I know one of the things that you do here is you pray with your friends, and our staff. Can you tell me about prayer and how important it's been in your life and maybe some ways that you've used prayer here?
Well, it's a part of my friendships here, and I think when I'm with this group, I just feel a very closeness to God, and I feel that I've grown with that. I think that the group itself helps in that respect, and I just feel very attached to the people here, and to you for leading us.
Oh, thank you. And I'm very attached to you too. It's very
Oh,
nice to
good.
be able to come and to lead you in worship.
Well, that's true.
I know that at noontime, sometimes you lead the prayer for the noon meal.
Yes.
Tell me about some of the things that you pray for or lift up in prayer.
I always think about my family and pray for them and hope that their life is directed by God. And I hope that it is. I feel that it is. I think as they grow older, it'll mean more to them even, because I know it has to me as I've gotten older.
Sure.
It means more. That's about it.
That sounds good. Do you enjoy lifting up prayers for the staff and friends?
Absolutely.
And I know
sure do.
we really appreciate that when you
Well,
do.
I think you should. And I know you do.
I do. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the things you enjoy when we get together for worship? What do you enjoy doing?
I enjoy the fellowship of everybody, and I love to hold hands. I think that helps with the feeling of closeness.
It does.
And I just feel that in the group like that, you can feel that closeness, and I always do. That's about it.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you very much for doing this for us today.
Oh, you're sure welcome.
Thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I was never very confident that I could be welcomed. I knew I was born in a Catholic family, but it kind of was sifting off, and this previous little thing going on now brought it up.
Isn't that great?
And I finally felt like I was really part.
Right, it feels so good to be embraced and welcomed as part of the community. It does, it really does. It makes the world a difference. It does. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Fran, what do you think about some of those words?
Well, they certainly relate to the things in my life, my wedding, my childbirth experiences.
Oh, wow, wonderful.
And even though I've lost a lot of my family members, I remember them with great joy.
That's beautiful.
I truly do.
You cherish them in your heart.
I do. I go down to breakfast and think they're going to be there sometimes.
Isn't that great? Isn't that great to look forward to something like that?
It is nice to feel that way about it. And it's easy then to communicate with their children.
That's right.
If there are those things.
Right.
So.
Those gifts allow us to communicate with others through love, joy, peace, patience,
And helping others
And
in
help.
that way.
and helping others
And
that
assisting them in some,
in some way. So love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control.
self-control is.
Those are good words.
Those are good words. They're hard sometimes to live by. Do we always feel like loving?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I don't say anything else. Working on that.
I have a record, I'm sure if records had been kept, for being the longest, what else was it? Patience. That's still developing.
That's still developing. It's a skill you're still working on.
Well, a lot of people have said that if you lack patience, don't worry, God will give you something to make you patient.
That's
And
right.
to practice being patient.
That's
Ooh,
right.
will I ever fall short in that department?
Well, I think we can all fall in What did you hear through those stories? What did you hear? A lot of comfort. They are a community. Very comfortable with each other. Faith is important. Self-worth. Right, so there has to be that relationship between the leader and the community, that back and forth dialogue. The environment is also important. As Chris mentioned, you really have to diminish the noises and create a sacred space. And also, I mean, I started forming this circle, which was helpful for me, and also then, while I'm standing today, but in those settings, I sit down, and so I can really be eye to eye. So. Right. It depends. There is a large group, but when we gather, I mean, everybody just kind of wants to come and be a part of it. So. The demographic was mostly women. Yes. Mm-hmm. So, finding those vital roles as people have always played is vitally important. And so roles of being a greeter, a reader. A third of our Clark choir has dementia, but we have created a community that invites people to come alongside, and so they have partners that sit next to them and really help and create that community and sense of belonging. They wear the robes and everything that just like they always have. There's the chance to be a host and hostess for worship, and then setting up and cleaning up as part of just community life. That, you know, that's just things that you do. For one of our Easter services last year, I had several individuals with memory loss read for our service, and they were scattered within the community sitting, and then the microphone would come to them, and during this very silent moment, one of the readers started to read again, and there was this instinct in me that wanted to say, no, it's not right now, not right now. But then it became very beautiful because her voice retold the story again that we were meditating on, and it was my fault that I didn't set it up in the proper way, but in a way it was just part of the beauty of giving that freedom and for our community to just let it go. You know, it didn't go as the ritual or as the plan indicated, but it was part of that beautiful serendipitous moment. So yes, the faith community and faith, those two things are vitally important for individuals with memory loss, and it's important for our community to find ways to embrace and then involve individuals with memory loss in very creative ways.
Thanks, Tim. All right, for this last section, we're going to shift to help to focus on how can you identify family caregivers and what can you do as faith community to reach out to them. And here we're actually broadly defining family, so it's not just the biological family, but it can be comprised of many people inside and outside the faith community. And if we think about who are the family caregivers, researchers tell us that the average duration of family caregiving is 4.5 years. That's significant because as family members, our expectation when we step into that role is, oh, I'm just going to be doing this a little bit. Mom falls, has a hip fracture, goes to the hospital, and as a family member, you may think, oh, 6 weeks, we'll be past this. But it's important to understand the expectation it is incorrect. It's not going to be a short thing. And when we're talking about family members that are involved with dementia care, we're actually talking about a much longer commitment. So instead of conceptualizing your role as a family caregiver as this short little sprint that you're going to do, one of the things that's important is to think about, maybe perhaps I'm actually running a marathon here, and I might be doing this a number of years, because you prepare for sprints quite differently than you prepare for marathons. But this just gives you some data about what we know about family caregivers. So who are the caregivers? Caregivers may be coping with their own health issues. It might be physical health problems that they're having, mental health problems. They may be adjusting to their own aging. They may be caring for someone from a distance. So my guess is you've got folks in your congregation who are caring for family members that live far away, and you've got family members, people in your congregation with dementia, and their loved ones are also far away. The family caregivers may also be grieving over losses and deaths for themselves and their friends, and they may be feeling quite vulnerable because they're now aware that they need some help. So when we think about what caregivers do, you know this. Family members will clearly say sometimes, I do whatever it takes. You know, whatever is needed from me, that's what I do. And we know that caregiving, the actual tasks, can kind of sneak up on a person. So it might start out that you're helping with what we would call instrumental activities of daily living. So you're going along with dad to a doctor's appointment. And it's not typically overnight that you're doing full care for somebody that's needing to have help with managing bowel problems or bladder problems. It's one of those things that can sneak up on you over time. We also know that the roles of caregivers are really varied. So when you're a family caregiver, you sometimes will wear the hat of a nurse, you'll wear the hat of a physician, you'll wear the hat of a pharmacist, you'll wear the hat of a psychologist, you'll wear the hat of a spiritual counselor or a financial advisor or a dental hygienist or an occupational therapist, because you're doing all these different tasks that are involved helping to support that person. One of the interventions that's available in the community that you're going to hear about is a program that's called the Savvy Caregiver Program. And they actually break down, here's what the different tasks are, so that you can start to have the perspective of, yes, I'm a loving daughter, or yes, I'm a devoted husband. I'm also a family caregiver, and these are the tasks that I have to do in this role to be successful in this role. And researchers also talk about caregiving is actually a career. And so when you think about having a career in something, that concept of having a career gives you the understanding that it's time consuming. You will spend time on this task. It's also something that you can develop skills in and get training for, and that your expertise changes and improves over time. So as you're involved in this career, you get better at it as you learn skills in how to manage it. Rhonda Montgomery has done some really nice work looking at what are the hours of care that are provided, and a lot of it depends on what your role is. So here you'll see that when someone is a spouse, it might be for somebody that's got Alzheimer's disease, in a typical week, they're spending almost 60 hours doing care tasks, where if they're a daughter or a son, they're involved up to 30 hours perhaps per week. So it just gives you a sense of all of the different pieces that are involved and the time that it takes. My clicker's not clicking. Okay. Sorry. Okay, do you mind? Okay, thank you. So when we think about the consequences of caregiving, when caregivers are asked as a group, what does caregiving mean to you? By and large, family members will talk about the benefits of caregiving. They don't talk about the burdens of it. They talk about the benefits of it. They'll describe it as loving, rewarding, and having that sense of knowing that my loved one is being taken care of. That's what motivates and drives people. That's how they think about it. And the majority of people will describe their experience like that. Next slide. What we know as health professionals, though, is that caregiving is considered a chronic stressor. It's this low-level stressor that over time doesn't go away, and it has consequences that are worse for people as a caregiver ages, as their own disease increases, and as their strain increases. Next slide. So we know that actually family caregivers will have lots of negative effects that can happen for them, ranging from financial problems, problems with their own health issues, both physical and emotional, and sometimes family caregivers will end up having shortened lives from the strain that they're dealing with. Next slide. Whoops. Back one more. Thank you. So how to identify family caregivers in your congregation? So if somebody is missing from church, if you notice that they're not around, or because they're tired, or they can't get the person that has dementia to get to church, or they feel embarrassed about how their loved one is behaving at church, that would be something to watch for. It might be that they have difficulty organizing or managing the tasks of life, so they will say things like, oh, I just couldn't see to get myself organized to get my taxes done this year. So you can watch for things like that. Or if they're coming with stained clothing that's not typical for them. It can also be that they would show up at church or synagogue with yet another cold or another cough or another medical procedure that's done, which might suggest that their immune system is not functioning the way that it used to. It could also be that they're expressing feelings of hopelessness or despair, beginning to question their faith or question God. Why is it that people suffer? So those would be things to consider looking for. When we think about caregiving and the stress process, we know that there are certain stressors of caregiving, and they are categorized like this. So the primary stressors are basically the day-to-day things that are in the job. So it might be if my dad, for example, isn't able to get out of bed by himself in the morning, I need to know, how am I supposed to transfer him from that to there without hurting myself? So a primary stressor is just the tasks that are involved. And here in our community, we have basically training that teaches family members all the different types of skills that they need to know to manage those particular stressors. Secondary stressors are actually the things that happen because of the primary stressors. So this would be an example of, my boss might be giving me a hard time because I'm so distracted at work thinking about my mom that I call her 6 times during the day. So that is an example of a secondary stressor. Or a contextual stressor are things that are just going on locationally, like the fact that winter was forever in Michigan this year. That's a contextual stressor. Now, the stress appraisal is basically how I look at the stressor. So how do I perceive it? How much of a mental or emotional strain is it for me to provide the care I'm doing? And you'll see wide variability in that for people. The psychosocial resources are those things that help us cope, whether they're internal things like having knowledge about what is dementia, learning about coping skills like Tim was referencing, learning how to do mindfulness, to breathe, what my personality is, what my spirituality is. Those are internal resources. Where external resources might be somebody else from the congregation that's coming to visit or bring us supper, or that I've got enough money, or I've got a respite certificate from the Area Agency on Aging that's going to cover me to be able to go to respite, to participate in some services. And what we look at is how we can actually balance this so that the stressors on the one side associated with caregiving don't tip over the resources that we've got, whether those are internal resources or external resources. So we want to just have that be balanced. And a couple of us here on a part of this group are from Pine Rest, and a significant problem for many family caregivers is the problem of depression. So if we have 100 people in a room that across their lifetime, about 6 of them will end up with an episode of depression. Where if we put 100 family caregivers in a room together, about 50 of them will end up with depression. So it's a very significant problem, and we really need to work to try to balance those stressors. We also know that for people with cognitive loss, if you put 100 people in a room with cognitive loss, about 50 of them depending on what studies you look at, some studies say up to 86 out of 100 of them will struggle with depression and anxiety. And there are treatments for those problems. So, and there are ways to prevent those problems from happening as well. So prevention is critical. If you would like to help the families that are in your church, one of the things that you can do certainly is to maintain your relationship and having a regular schedule of contact. If somebody's shut in, but even if they're just not participating, to follow up with people. And if you visit, you know, a loved one that's in a long-term care setting, leave a note or a card or somehow sign into a guest book so that the family knows that you're there. Those types of things mean tremendous things to family members, to know that their loved one means so much to them that you haven't forgotten them. Ambiguous loss is another thing that's really important to understand, and that is loss that people feel when someone is physically present, like their loved one with dementia, but they're psychologically absent, or they're psychologically different than they used to be. So in this situation, it's really important to think about defining the psychological family, the family within the faith tradition of people who have gone before us. So that might be their grandparents, their parents, other people in the congregation, and then normalize the grieving that family caregivers feel in this situation, because there is this tremendous sense of tugging and inside yourself with a lack of closure, and offer support and think about praying for the person in that situation. Other things that you can do to help families is to encourage them to take care of themselves, just like Tim led with the breathing exercise. Before we do this work that we are involved in, getting a sense of centering ourselves, and they use that image sometime of putting on your own oxygen mask before you help the person that you're taking care of. Considering offering acts of service and hospitality, so that might be that you're offering respite, and it might be that you're offering respite that you go stay with a person that has dementia for an hour, or that you offer to do something for the caregiver. Consider some sort of systematic way that you're making meals. You know, that every Monday somebody from the congregation is going to be bringing a meal over for you, or offering to help with chores, or just being a friend with the person. And asking, what can I do? How can I be involved and be helpful? In your congregations, one of the things that we would suggest is consider creating a caregiver-friendly congregation. So offer the possibility that someone could sit next to them during worship, so that they could have a worship service that's free of distractions sometimes. If you don't have a faith health ministries team within your church, that would be something else to focus on. And then the area resources that we're going to be talking about. Know what those are, okay? Encourage people to participate. And one of the things you might consider is starting a support group in your faith community. As we mentioned, taking care of yourself is an important thing, but just because you, as a concerned member of your congregation or parish, say, gosh, I hope you take care of yourself, oh family caregiver, we know that that isn't usually what happens for somebody. So one of the things that you can try to do is to understand, what does it mean to them to be a caregiver, to think about a story. If they were going to narrate this story, this part of their lives for themselves, how would they do that? For some, thinking about caregiving, they think about it as a marathon. To think about, I've fought the good fight, I've run the course, you know, I'm doing what God has placed before me to do. And it's important we think about, even in creation, God worked for 6 days and then rested. So when do we rest as caregivers? How do we do that? How do they rest? How do they pace themselves? Another image that some people like is the image of honoring the mission. This is the mission that I've been given. And one of the things you want to do as a concerned someone from your faith community is to avoid giving advice to somebody too soon, but really ask about what is their sense of mission. And when it seems like it's at the time, to kind of raise that issue of sustainability. You thought you were going to be doing this for just a short little jaunt here, and now it's been 2 years. And it looks like it could go on for a much longer time. So where are your sources of sustenance? How do you keep yourself going in this? Another kind of image or story or narrative to consider would be, receiving with grace. I think certainly in many faith traditions, there's an assumption that all of us would much rather give to somebody than to receive from somebody. But if you're going to run this race, part of what's important is to have that sustenance or to utilize support in some way. And lots of spiritual traditions actually see that there's good in receiving, offering others the blessing of doing good. My husband's grandmother used to say, Marky, don't rob somebody of a blessing, if they want to do something helpful. And that can be one way, too, that you offer to a family caregiver. What you're doing is allowing this person to get a blessing by helping you. We also know that a majority of caregivers really are never going to need formal mental health services like at Pine Rest or Arbor Circle or Gerontology Network or anything like that. But those people that do are those caregivers who are so depressed or so anxious or so angry or that they're struggling with so much guilt that it really affects their ability to function adequately or to provide care or if they're having really severe symptoms related to that. In closing, part of what we know about the faith tradition is that it teaches us about a God who will know our name even when we have forgotten every name we've ever known, including our own. And really part of what we can do is embody the presence of that remembering God in their lives and remember that the God who created them will never forget them or forsake them in this life or the next one. So that's, in a sense, almost like a benediction for us to remember. And in your handout, there are some references that are listed. I wanted to just highlight a couple of them. In terms of practical help for family caregivers, one of the best books that I've liked is the book by Cameron Camp, C-A-M-P. It's called Hiding the Stranger in a Mirror. And it's a detective's manual for solving problems. And part of what it teaches is how do you put on that detective hat to solve problems that are associated with family caregiving. So that's Cameron Camp. And then there are also references on the second page of faith community references. Thompson and Lip have done some really nice work on ministry with persons with mental illness and their families. And that's a nice reference too. So, and there's sources that are pulled from it that are on this handout, the light green one. So those are the references. If I were you, I'd put a star next to them because they're really well worth it. And that is Cameron Camp's book, Hiding the Stranger in the Mirror, and then Thompson and Lip under the faith community references. And I also just wanted to briefly highlight Sister Nathalie that's here today. One of the things that we have been encouraging with the work that we've been doing is to look at how the community might organize and connect the health services in the community with the faith communities in a real systematic way. And over the last few years, there's been some work with this organization called Tandem 365, and she's actually coordinating that for our community. So if that's an effort or an interest of yours to be involved in, contact her. So, yep. All right.
Please.
So I think Val, yep.
Thank you so much, Tim and Chris and Suzanne. I think they deserve our round of applause. That was fantastic.